Are you
Are you
there?
there? It's pretty. I don't have a good Wi-Fi signal. I'm gonna move actually and see if that helps.
There.
I'll be right back.
Okay.
So I came into a place where I should have a stronger signal and I do not. So we'll see how it goes.
Oh, how's the house coming?
Actually, we're making progress in that we actually have a new company working on the issue. So um,
Oh, what's the issue?
foundation work, and it was just
Okay.
not getting done. That was the main issue. So we have we do have a deadline now. So hopefully we'll see some progress. And
Well, I'm married to a guy who spent 25 years of his life building homes for people. And we learned that when a contractor tells you, or when a person tells you it's going to take this long for us to do it, you triple that and maybe it will work.
yeah, that's
Ah,
about right. That's about right. Because we were almost 2.5 months into work that was, yeah. Well, it is what it
I've
is.
got major bedhead today. Oh,
It looks like it may just be you and me today.
oh,
Oh, I don't
okay.
have, uh-oh, what's going on here? I didn't realize that I hadn't enabled chat. Sorry, guys. Hang on one second. Um, where are we going? Everyone, everyone. Okay. Oh, hang on one
Well,
second.
Tony's on,
It's Tony.
I think.
Hey, Tony.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can hear you fine. Sorry, Tony.
I was like, what is going on
I'm glad you're here now.
here?
Did you get a link to because you're actually like a co-host. I don't know why.
He just did something funky. I don't know what happened.
Okay, okay. Well, I'm glad y'all are here. It's good to see you, Tony.
Good to be
Um,
seen.
so let me see. Let me pull up the liturgy, and I'll tell you what. How about Paula? Can you be the liturgist?
I can.
And Tony, if you would be the voice of the people.
Gotcha.
Okay. And then let's see. How about also Tony, if you don't mind doing the Hebrew Bible reading, um,
Gotcha.
and Paula, if you would do the New Testament reading. Does that sound good?
And I'll check Facebook for
Okay.
comments.
Thank you. Appreciate that. All right. Whenever you guys are ready.
On this day in 1819, the Bab, meaning the gate, was born in Iran with the name Ali Muhammad. He would become a religious leader and prophet, founding Babism in 1844, which was a precursor of the Baha'i faith. Also on the day in 1947, the House Committee on Un-American Activities began its investigation of purported communists in Hollywood. The committee would go on to blacklist over 300 members of the film industry. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Hear these words of invitation.
The hospitality of God knows no bounds.
The love of God is immeasurable.
The generosity of God is beyond our wildest dreams.
We gather today as invited ones,
As beloved ones,
as blessed ones.
draw near and let us break bread of life.
Our responsive reading is from the 91st Psalm. Because you made the Lord my refuge, the Most High your place of residence.
No evil will happen to you. No disease will come close to your tent.
Because he will order his messengers to
Did Paula freeze or did I freeze?
I think she froze a bit.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Am I
Go ahead.
back?
You're
Yeah.
back.
Because he will order his messengers to help you, to protect you wherever you go.
They will carry you with their own hands so you don't bruise your foot on a stone.
You'll march on top of lions and vipers. You'll trample young lions and serpents underfoot.
God says, because you are devoted to me, I'll rescue you.
I'll read this part. I'll
Go
protect
ahead.
you because you know my name.
Whenever you cry out to me, I'll answer.
I'll be with you in troubling times.
I'll save you and glorify you.
I'll fill you full with old age.
I'll show you my salvation. Paula, you back? Okay.
Okay, just keep going.
All right. Our Hebrew reading today comes from Isaiah chapter 53, verses 4 through 12, and I'll be reading from the Common English Bible. It was certainly our sickness that he carried and our suffering that he bore. But we thought him afflicted, struck down by God, and tormented. He was pierced because of our rebellion and crushed because of our crimes. He bore the punishment that made us whole. By his wounds we are healed. Like sheep, we have all wandered away, each going his own way. But the Lord let fall on him all of our crimes. He was oppressed and tormented, but did not open his mouth. Like a lamb being brought to slaughter, like a ewe silent before her shearers, he did not open his mouth. Due to an unjust ruling, he was taken away, and his fate, who will think about it? He was eliminated from the land of the living, struck dead because of my people's rebellion. His grave was among the wicked, his tomb with evildoers, though he had done no violence and had spoken nothing false. But the Lord wanted to crush him and make him suffer. In his life, if his life is offered as restitution, he will see his offsprings. He will enjoy long life. The Lord's plan will come to fruition through him. After his deep anguish, he will see light and will be satisfied. Through his knowledge, the righteous one, my servant, will make many righteous and will bear their guilt. Therefore, I will give him a share with the great, and he will divide the spoil with the strong. In return for exposing his life to death and being numbered with rebels, though he carried the sin of many and pleaded on behalf of those who rebelled.
The New Testament reading is Mark 10, 35 to 45. James and John, Zebedee's son, came to Jesus and said, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask." "What do you want me to do for you?" he asked. They said, Allow one of us to sit on your right and the other on your left when you enter your glory. Jesus replied, You don't know what you're asking. Can you drink the cup I drink or receive the baptism I receive? Oh, we can, they answered. Jesus said, You will drink the cup I drink and receive the baptism I receive. But to sit by my right or left hand isn't mine to give. It belongs to those for whom it has been prepared. Now, when the other 10 disciples heard this, they became angry with James and John. Jesus called them over and said, You know that the ones who are considered the rulers by the Gentiles show off their authority over them, and their high ranking officials order them around. But that is not the way it will be with you. Whoever wants to be great among you will be your servant. Whoever wants to be first among you will be the slave of all. For the human one didn't come to serve, but rather come to be served, but rather to serve, and to give his life to liberate many people. May God bless the hearing of this word.
Thanks be to God.
Andrew Newberg writes, What does God feel like? When I ask people this question, their reaction is often the same. They pause for a very long time. This means something special to neuroscientists, namely that a great deal of your neurological activity is taking place as different parts of the brain attempt to put into words a concept that defies the parameters of language for many people. Indeed, for most believers, God is much more than an idea. God is a deeply valued experience that goes far beyond any theological definition of the word, which is why most people responded with a version of, Wow, what a question. It's really hard to say.
Thank you all for getting us started with worship. Thanks, thanks for dealing with the technological issues, Paul. I appreciate your innovative solution there to come on board. We'll go into a time of prayer. I'll get us started, and those of you, if you're streaming, if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, if you want to lift up a prayer request, feel free just to put it in the comments, and we'll include that in our prayer today. Let's go to God in prayer. Gracious God, we recognize our brains really don't even know what to make of you. We lift our voices in prayer. We lift our hearts in prayer, knowing, God, that it is like putting a message in a bottle. And yet we know that you are all around us, not far off or on a distant shore. We have a hard time saying what or who you are, yet we know we can feel your love for us. And so we lift up to you all those who feel far from love, who feel alone, who feel betrayed, who are the victims of violence and oppression. We ask that you make your love manifest to the whole planet, to those who are sick and suffering, to those who are struggling economically, to those who are nomads and wanderers on the earth. We ask your blessing for us in our personal struggles, asking you to form us more perfectly into the image of your Son, Jesus Christ. And we lift up to you the people and situations that are dear to us, and I invite those of you who are listening to share your prayer concerns.
Wayne and Lee Collum.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Scotty and Angie McCullough.
Lord, hear our prayer. Healing for the Lewis family. Lord, hear our prayer.
Healing for the hurricane victims.
Lord, hear our prayer. For the family and friends of Ruth Weaver as we gather to celebrate her life. Lord, hear our prayer.
For our political process and all those who are weary from it.
Lord, hear our prayer. For Shirley Fumby and Barbara Phillips. Lord, hear our prayer. For caregivers, Lord, hear our prayer.
For everyone struggling to make ends meet.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For people alienated from their families and communities of support.
Lord, hear our prayer. Gratitude for art, Lord, hear our prayer.
The beauty of the changing seasons.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For new friendships.
Lord, hear our prayer.
God, for those things that we've mentioned and the prayers of our hearts that we don't know how to put into words, we give you thanks that you hear and that you answer. And we join with Jesus in the prayer that he taught us to pray. Holy One, our Mother and Father, let your name be revered. Let your reign come. Let your will be done on earth as it is in the heavens. Give us today the bread we need for today, and forgive our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from the time of trial and deliver us from evil. For yours is the sovereignty, the power, and the glory, now and forever. Amen. So thanks again, guys, for getting us started worship today. I've been kind of focusing on the Gospel of Mark the last few weeks, and today the scripture is kind of a continuation of some things we've already heard in Mark 9 and 10. And just to kind of recap, Jesus has been saying for many passages in a row now that greatness and power is not what we think it is. And in the stories that we've heard over the last few weeks, Jesus talks about, becoming like a little child to enter the kingdom of heaven. Jesus talks to a rich young ruler about how it's easier for a camel to get through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter into heaven. And again, Jesus lifts up this idea that greatness, power, salvation are not what we think it is. So before I talk about Mark, though, I want to talk about this Hebrew passage because it often gets read around Easter time. And it's one of the many suffering servant songs that Isaiah writes. There's some passages in Isaiah that you're probably familiar with, things like by his stripes or by his wounds we are healed. That's one of the common phrases that you hear from this passage. The suffering servant songs are later on, Christians, people who follow Jesus, would read these songs and say, that describes Jesus. That describes Jesus, his passion and execution. But way before it meant anything about that, it was written about Israel. It was written about the punishment that Israel got, or that they felt they got. See, for a long time, prophets have been telling Israel, straighten up and fly right. You need to do right by the poor among you. You need to stop following other gods and that sort of thing. And then when bad things would happen to the nation, they would say, see, it's because you didn't straighten up and fly right. You mistreated the poor. You followed other gods. You made unwise alliances. And the job of the prophets was generally to tell the people and the leaders to do what God was asking them to do. If you've tuned in any to St. Junia, or you've heard us talk about justice and the prophets, you probably realize, like, we still have prophets. Prophets are telling us, hey, you need to be aware that the stuff you're doing is hurting the environment. You're going to create a problem that you're not going to be able to recover from. I mean, this was the prophet's message. You need to do social justice. You need not to exacerbate wealth inequality. You need to do right by the poor. Otherwise, you're going to have a problem you can't recover from. This is what the prophets said again and again and again and again. And eventually, Israel had a problem they couldn't recover from. Israel in the north, Judah in the south, both got attacked by enemy empires. People got carted off into exile, and the prophet said, "See, I told you so." But Isaiah did something unique. Isaiah did something interesting in the history of theology. He was a prophet that actually said, you know what? This punishment was a little bit extreme. Israel got more than they deserved. You didn't deserve to be carted off into exile, and you didn't deserve all this terrible stuff to happen to you. This was actually injustice. I think a lot of Christians don't realize that. When we tell the story of the Hebrew Bible, the so-called Old Testament, when I was in Sunday school, when I was growing up, I was taught these bad things happened to Judah and Israel, to the nation, because they didn't follow what God was telling them to do. I mean, that's the way I was taught. And certainly there were prophets who believed that, but Isaiah, it says, no, actually, that's not what happened. What happened was they got more than they deserved. They got punished more than they deserved. But then Isaiah is kind of struggling with the justice of God. Well, what does that mean about God and God's faithfulness? And Isaiah kind of stumbles upon this idea that the other nations around Israel and Judah, when they saw the way Judah and Israel behaved under hardship, they would have a better idea of who God was and God's faithfulness. And that when God restored them, that would be a real testimony to the whole world of the kind of God that they followed, that God was not an unfair God, but that sometimes you might go through distress because God has a bigger plan in mind. Okay, so this is a theological innovation that Isaiah brought to the whole idea of prophetic teaching. And so later on, Christians, when they were following Jesus, they read the suffering servant passages, and they said, aha, this is like Jesus. This is what happened to Jesus. Because what happened to him was unfair. So it must have been for a greater purpose, must have been for a greater good. And so Jesus tells his disciples repeatedly over the last several passages, last chapter or two, that leadership, that following God does not mean wealth and glory and privilege, but instead means service and suffering. And so James, in this passage, James and John, and part of what I want to help you see today is that this passage is not just about James and John being full of themselves and saying, we get to be close to Jesus. We're going to sit on your right and left hand. I mean, that's part of it. But keep in mind that this story is being written for the early church, okay? So the author who's sitting down to tell this story has a group of people in mind that the author is trying to communicate a message to. And so this story it's not just a story about James and John and the disciples having conflict. This is meant to be a lesson or make a point to the followers, the early followers of Jesus, okay? And so just to kind of show you some of the irony here, James and John make this request of Jesus. Hey, when you achieve glory, when you come into your kingdom, can we get to sit on your left and right hand? We want to be close to you. We want to be second in charge. You know, maybe they want to be great. Maybe they just really love Jesus. Regardless, the fact is they're making a request of Jesus. We want to sit on your right and left hand. And Jesus says, guys, do you actually know what you're asking? You know, the idea is if you want to be like me, that involves suffering and dying. That involves That's not a privilege. That's not something that most people aspire to. And they say, oh, yeah, we can handle it. Because again, they don't really have a clue what Jesus is talking about. And Jesus says, okay, fine. Actually, that is going to happen to you because you are my followers, but I don't get to decide who's going to sit on my left and right hand. And then, of course, all the other disciples hear it. And here's the funny thing, they're jealous. Now, Jesus has just said, you want to sit on my left and right hand. It's not what you're asking for is pretty harsh. And the other disciples, again, they're jealous for that. Oh, no, we want to be on your right and left hand. Again, Mark is writing this for the early church, for the followers of Jesus. And I just need to say, even today, 2,000 years later, how much Christian leaders and Christian denominations really want the greatness. They really want the privilege, but they don't want the suffering. And you can look at white Christian nationalism as a great example of that, where people believe that Christianity means greatness and bigness and strength, means being virtuous, means occupying a position of privilege. And Jesus is saying, no, no, if you're really going to follow me, it's going to mean suffering. It's going to be hard. I love studying other religions too. That's why today, I felt it was important to include a mention about the Baha'i faith, even though I'm not Baha'i and I don't agree necessarily with theology. I think it's important for Christians to know about other faiths. I'm a big fan of, I'm not a Buddhist, but I'm a big fan of Buddhism. I love the fact that Buddha, when he was talking to his followers, one of his famous sayings is, we don't talk about enlightenment. Now, this is the Buddha, right? And he's telling his followers, the Buddha means awake, right? The word Buddha means awake. So, and that's sort of the whole point of Buddhism is you're striving for enlightenment. You're striving to wake up, to be fully conscious of who you are and where you are in the present moment. And the Buddha says to his followers, we don't talk about enlightenment. And part of the point is we don't talk about enlightenment, right? We're not just jawing because it makes us feel smart. Enlightenment is something you don't have to broadcast. Right? You either have it or you don't. And I think what Jesus is telling his followers, I think what Mark is telling his followers here is something similar, right? That following Jesus, we don't talk about following Jesus. And that's pretty much all we do in the church. We talk a lot about following Jesus, but following Jesus means suffering. That following Jesus means putting others' needs ahead of your own. Following Jesus means you are the servant of all, and you are willing to die for other people. That's what following Jesus means. And I think that's something really hard. Even most Christian denominations don't understand this. And by the way, I'm putting myself in that category. I think we're all trying to figure out what it means to follow Jesus. When I think about denominations and people kind of trying to play, oh, we're closer to Jesus than you are. We understand Jesus better than you do. We're the enlightened ones. We're the ones who are really following Jesus. I think that's part of the struggle, right? Because if you're caught in that trap, then you're like the disciples, arguing, getting angry at James and John for wanting to be close to Jesus. I think this is one of those things where if you're following Jesus, you don't need to sit at his left or right hand, right? If you're following Jesus, you recognize I should probably be sitting at the other end of the table. And that's really the attitude of a Christian who's following Jesus. I'm not really trying to be at the left or right hand, right? If I'm trying that, and if I'm angry with other people doing that, then I haven't gotten it yet. That this is really following Jesus is about servanthood. So I love the story. I think we can. I think it's a little bit like a trap. If you think the last shall be first and the first shall be last, and someone says, "Okay, good, then I'll be last, so I can be first." As soon as you do that, you fall into the trap, right? So following Jesus is really about a personal attitude of being willing to put the needs of the world, the needs of I don't mean, by the way, being a doormat, but I mean the idea that I'm here to make the world better. Like my mission in life is to bring the kingdom about, and it's not about my own glory. Um, I think I'll stop there. I'd love to hear your thoughts or reflections on this.
Wave at me if I go off.
Okay.
um, the New Testament, the Christian scriptures, talks several times about death to self and dying to self. In Greek, the word self is ego. Transliterated into English, it's ego, death to ego. And your ego is what makes you want to go me first, and I want the best, and I'm an exception to the rule, and all of that crap. And to die to self, to die to your ego, is to understand that everybody's just as important as you are,
Yeah.
and that you shouldn't be living to gratify your own needs as much as living to help the entire community so that the entire community is healthier. And it's not becoming a doormat. As a matter of fact, I think that person who learns to die to their ego is a much happier person. You look at some of the people who have huge egos, like Elon Musk, and all you can see is anger. You know, when that's your priority, there is no happiness there.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's the hardest thing in the world to do, because our first instinct is to go for what's best for me instead of go for what's best for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I like the way you said that. Richard Rohr, who's one of my favorite writers about this, talks about the true self and the false self, right? And that in a lot of ways, when you die to your false self, you become more yourself. And I think that's something like you said, instead of being a doormat, I think you have healthier boundaries. Instead of trying to, think that I'm God and I can satisfy the world, I have to recognize my limitations, and that itself is part of dying to the false self.
And I had a psychologist tell me one time that when you start living from that true self, all hell is going to break out. And it does.
Yeah.
There are people who are very comfortable with you living through your false self, and they don't like it when you change, and they want to get you back to where you were and drop all those boundaries you've set. And yeah, there's suffering that comes with it, even when you're doing it from an entirely selfless motivation and with all the resources you need.
Yeah, thanks for that.
I was going to say, in the process of proselytizing people or getting people to come to Christ, I think a lot of preachers mess up by trying to make Christianity sexy. Like this is the new cool thing to do. So like we're all going to follow the Lord. And at the end of the day, the work we do is not sexy. I mean, it's good work. It's hard work, but like it's not. I had a friend who was our minister of music. His name was H. Allen Green, and he hated how did he call it? He hated songs that were not theologically sound.
Yeah.
So like
Amen.
in the Black diaspora of gospel music, we have a lot of songs that when you listen to, oh, they sound great. But like there's this one song called Safe in His Arms. It's like, it's almost like they say, when you give yourself up to Jesus, the safest place in the world. And it's not. Like that's when the world starts to attack you. But with that message, it's kind of hard to get people to come over to your side. Like, wait a minute, hold on. I follow this person, all of a sudden I get knives in my back.
Yeah.
I'm gonna stay over here where it's cool.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, I like people don't understand what true leadership looks like. So like with the two disciples that wanted to be the secondary leaders next to Jesus, like they didn't understand. They understood what we perceived as the glamour of being in that spot, but they didn't understand all the toils and trials that come along with that. I'm in a place right now where, for the first time in 30 years, I have a job in which I am responsible for myself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not managing people. I'm not telling people what to do, and it's absolutely heaven.
Mm.
You know, most people want jobs where I'm the boss. I get to tell people. Managing people, I can only imagine what Jesus went through with those 12 dudes.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
I can only imagine what he went through. And so, like, being wanting to be first is almost like a self-fulfilling bad prophecy within itself. You know, I
Yeah.
even think about, I wish we would apply some of those principles when it comes to loading airplanes. Because like the people in first class, like literally they should be the last people to get on the plane.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
because of what? Ego, right, Paula? Because of ego, I gotta feel like I'm better than you and I have more privilege to you that I get to get on first. It will make everything so much easier. Like if you know you're gonna sit on the last plane, sit in the plane, get in first. Because the first will
Yes.
be last, the last will be first when we get off.
Yes. Right. Right. And then you're not waiting on people to put their bags up so you can get to the back of the plane. That makes no sense.
None.
Absolutely.
It's all about ego and the fact that we think too much of ourselves.
Yes. Yes. The people sitting in the back of the plane should load it first, and then you should fill up to the front. And then if you are smart, why do you want to be sitting on a plane for longer? Right? I mean, go get another cheeseburger or something or another drink from the bar. I mean, really, it doesn't make exactly. No,
And
it's
Tony, I grew up hearing that when you were living faithfully with Jesus, it was the safest place in the world to be. It's the most dangerous place in the world to
yeah,
be. It is. We don't count the cost any more than those two brothers did.
right. I mean, I think about, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Martin Luther King, Oscar Romero, all the people who, we look at and we say, oh, that person really followed Jesus. And where did, where did they end up? They were assassinated. Um, I do think, when you are taking a role and following Jesus, and of course, not everyone's going to be assassinated who's following Jesus, but I think, you're going to be living counterculturally. If you are living in a self-giving way, in a way that understands that you're not here just to satisfy your own needs, you're here for a greater purpose, then that's going to put you at odds with most of the rest of the world. I think kind of again, I love the Buddha quote that we don't talk about enlightenment. I mean, it's not like a secret, but I mean, the idea is that whenever I've heard as a pastor, whenever I've heard servant leadership, it always gives me I feel a little creepy about it, just because I feel like most of the time when people are talking about it, they don't really understand what they're talking about. Um, that being a servant is it's not about a hierarchy. It's not about leaders are up here and servants down here. And I think that's part of what Jesus is saying. Like the leaders of the Gentiles lord it over them. But if you really understand the assignment, then you don't care about leadership anymore. You just don't care about being first or last. It's completely irrelevant. You're going to do your mission. And if you're doing your mission, does that mean you're a leader? Some people might follow you because they say, oh, they resonate with your mission. But you might be completely on your own, like Jesus was, at the end when all his disciples deserted him. I think that's part of this idea is that, we think in terms of leaders and followers, and people who are following Jesus are just marching to a completely different drum. They're on a different assignment, and it has very little to do with who's in front and who's following.
You mentioned Christian nationalists
Mm-hmm.
earlier, and like I'm gonna equate those to evangelicals, and I think we've talked about this time and time again. But it's like the people who claim to be the closest to Jesus, like the ones who want to be right by his side, like
Mm-hmm.
they do the least of his work. Like
Frequently.
they literally do the least of his work. They're not friendly to the stranger. They're not kind to the downhearted. They don't feed the poor. Like, don't house the homeless. And it's like, how does this make? And I think, I don't know what your latest read on statistics of people who proclaim to be Christian or religious in this country is. I'm pretty sure it's gone down. But like, it's not very attractive for you, like, for the Great Commission. Like, if we're literally praising people who say cruel, nasty, ugly things about people, but then they still say they're doing this under the Christian flag. Like, it's the biggest contradiction in the world.
Sure.
Like,
Yeah.
the biggest. And I just wish more liberals and progressives would really, and I know why they don't, because there are a lot of us who are not religious. But like, religion should not be offensive. I think when your religion becomes offensive, then you've done something wrong. Yeah, religion should not be offensive. Like, it should not be the thing that when people go, I'm taking, I'm back in school, right? And earlier this year, no, earlier this semester, one of my teachers asked us about our identities. It's on our health equity class for health equity Alabama. And they had this identity wheel. They want you to talk about your identities and which identities that you lead with, which ones you try to play down. And, we all are who we are. And there was this one person that I had to challenge, and it was anonymous. Like, no one knew who was talking or saying what. But this one person goes, well, I identify as a Christian, and we're persecuted in this country. What? You're what now?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, when did you become the victim?
Yeah.
Like, literally, you go around, do all manner of evil, say all type of stuff about other people. When do you become the victim?
Yeah. Well, and that's actually in the sociological research on Christian nationalism, that's a common belief among people whose beliefs fall along that spectrum, that Christians are persecuted. And we've had no non-Christian presidents ever. When you look at the makeup of who actually is in charge, who's in leadership, nobody nobody's going to even get away with not saying "God bless America" in this country, and then make it anywhere in politics. So, yeah, I do think. I mean, I understand what you're saying about offense. I think part of it is like who we give an offense to. I definitely think Christianity should be offensive to billionaires.
And I asked him, like, what did you say to make people offended? Like, did you talk
Yeah.
about the gays and lesbians and say Mexico need to go back home? Like, if you did, then that's offensive. Like, it is what it is. Like, it is offensive.
Yeah.
But they think that they can say these things without any type of repercussions and no one say anything back. And that's just not how this works. Like,
Yeah.
Jesus was not offensive to people.
Well, I think when we like in this conversation that James and John are having with Mark too, part of it is like, we by being at your left and right hand, right? There's an implied we're more important, or we're closer to you, or we really get it, or what, however you want to understand that. It's like me and Jesus, we're tight, and I think a lot of times like we still think that way in terms of who's right, who's good, who's important. And I don't think Jesus would be jockeying for position beside Jesus. Like if Jesus, if Jesus were one of the disciples following Jesus, Jesus would be like, yeah, you can have first and second position.
Let me say over here.
Yeah, I know. I'm gonna sit over here at the foot of the table. I'm not gonna be up there. Just it's really fascinating how even following someone who said, define your life, you must lose it, we still wind up competing for the second and third chair.
It's antithetical to the faith, and I don't understand. But it's interesting. But those are the churches that are full. When you started preaching, I was like, Dave says a lot of stuff that is not very ear appealing to people. Like, it's not going to like make you. I think I need to go do that. But at the end of the day, it's the stuff that God wants us to do. And how can you be a Christian without doing the stuff that God wants you to do?
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah.
I think those churches that are so successful are appealing to those people who also want to be so successful. And like the so-called gospel that's being preached there.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
Dave, I will spend the rest of my day with an earworm in my ear because you've said we don't talk about enlightenment so much. We don't talk about Bruno
We're gonna
Bruno,
talk about Bruno. Yeah, yeah. We should get Disney to do a musical about Buddha, and that could be one of like we don't talk about enlightenment. It could be one of those songs. Yeah.
They would change the ending. They do on
I
everything else.
yes, right.
well, Buddha be changing water to wine and like,
Yeah.
but I really do wish that I keep hearing we keep going down these YouTube rabbit holes, and with this political climate
Mhm.
and all these people talking about, the United States was founded as a Christian nation, blah blah
Oh
blah.
gosh.
Okay, so if it was, what are you doing as Christian? Like,
Yeah.
what if it was? We
Yeah.
know that it's not, but if it was, what are you doing? How many people are you really trying to help, live a better life? And
Mhm.
and the more and more I look at it, the more and more I study it, capitalism is the antichrist. Like, you add capitalism to anything, and it is going to ruin it. And I'm taking the African American studies class, and really, you would have thought that the cotton gin would have helped got people out of slavery. It just made it worse.
Right. Right.
Because
Well, we
now we
talk.
can do 20 bells a day instead of 5. And we're gonna need more of y'all to help us with this.
Yeah, last week we told the story about the wealthy man, going. It's easier for a camel to go through an eye of a
That's
needle.
one of my favorite
About how it's
parables.
so hard, like, like we're all stuck in this game. We're all stuck playing this game, and it's so hard for us to quit playing it.
And I
And
guess you've heard all of the rationalizations for the eye of the camel.
oh yeah, yeah, like it's really a real gate that camels had to get down. Blah blah blah. Yeah, yeah.
Do anything
So
to
much
keep
energy
living
put
your
into.
life.
I'm sorry, what?
No, go ahead.
No,
I was
what
just
you
saying
said,
so
repeat
much
what you said,
energy
brother.
put into explaining away something that is obviously meant to be uncomfortable.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, there's only one way to look at that, you know.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
even for the literalists, like, there's only one way to look at that. Like, why are we trying to add context that's not even relevant?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I do think this passage in a way kind of goes along with that. Like it's just so hard for us to quit playing the game of who's most important or who's on top or accumulation. I mean, it's just I mean, even when you're trying to stop playing, it's hard to stop playing. I mean, even among um, as I've kind of become aware of, and I'm grateful that there's such a movement of ex-evangelicals, right, of people kind of moving away from white Christian nationalism and away from uh, you know penal substitutionary atonement theory and right wing Christianity. Um, the fact is, there's a hierarchy among progressive Christians too, which really irritates me. Celebrity preachers, many of whom I've met, who are nice people, and some of whom are kind of mystified. They're still subject to the profit-making, book publishing, church growth conference stuff, and
And that's why it's so important to always keep self-examination going.
yeah.
It can be very painful, but we can get so tripped up in our own lives without even realizing what we're doing
Oh yeah.
and chasing after those symbols of success if we're not constantly asking ourselves about our priorities and what we're doing.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Yeah. Well, that kind of feels like a good place to wrap up, honestly. I know we still got some time before 11, but we don't have to go for a full hour. So why don't we, I'm gonna just check the stream real quick, make sure. Oh, um, I'm sorry, Sarah Grace, I missed you on YouTube. She said um, they're so eager to add context to Rich get through the eye and take the homosexual verses completely literally. That's true, right? People can be very literalist when it suits them, and then suddenly when it comes to justice for the poor or rich people getting into heaven, suddenly, oh, that's just a metaphor. That's poetic language. Um, Yes, Sarah Grace, we don't, right now, we don't have a firm plan about when our next in-person gathering is, but I will text with you in a little bit and let you know kind of what we're planning, what we're thinking about. I'm still trying to move to Huntsville right now, so that really has a lot of things on hold, unfortunately. Once I get up here, I'll be better able to kind of figure out when we are actually going to meet in person. Any other things for the good of the order before we move to close? All right, let me go ahead and share up the liturgy here. All right.
Our closing prayer is from Soren Kierkegaard. O God, who is unchangeable, yet who in infinite love is moved even by the need of a sparrow, may there be wrought in us through prayer such changes as will bring our lives into unity with you. O God, who is unchangeable in love. Amen.
God is love. Nothing is wasted. All things shall be well. Go in peace.
So thank you all so much for thank you for being here, and thanks to those of you who've been streaming on Facebook or YouTube. Again, if you've been watching the stream, just make a comment, let us know where you're watching from, or click like. That gives us a way to count your presence with us today. I'm going to stop the stream, and if you're on Zoom, you can stick around for just a minute more.